Hey guys, what's going on? It's Dave from Evil Eye Games. Today's video, I'm going to go ahead and finish up with our saving system, and we're going to clean it up and make it accessible so we can use it in other places. Right now, we have practically everything we need in place, so we're going to follow this through from the beginning to the end to figure out how we can get everything to kind of work right. First of all, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to open up our HUD in our main menu widget. And I start here because this is where everything kind of begins. So, in our main menu widget, we're getting a reference to our game instance, we're checking for a save game, and then we're setting a button as enabled. Then when we go ahead and click on the continue button to load up our save, we're doing this casting to the HUD, setting the widget, loading our 3P game, getting a persistent level, and then opening the level. And the question that may arise now is, why are we doing this in the main menu? And that's a really good question, because we really actually shouldn't have to do any of this. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on our load 3P game function from our game instance. And that's going to open up our 3P game instance and bring us to our load 3P game function. And what we're doing in our function here is we're checking for a save game. And if it's true, we're going to load from slot, cast to the save, and then get the save game instance variables and set those. But what else we're doing out here is we're also using the HUD to go ahead and set the player widget, and then we're opening the level. Now we could package this down into just this function in the game instance, so that way we can actually call on this function and it will do all of the work for us, and we can use this in other locations. For example, when the player dies, we can just use this to load up the last save. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to copy this right here. So our get player controller, our get HUD, casting to the HUD and setting the current widget. And inside of our 3P game instance function here, right here, when we load up the game from slot, we cast it to slot and we set the game instance variables. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to grab all of this and I'm just going to drag it right. So coming off of our true branch after we check for the save game, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to paste this into place here. And it's a little bit crammed, so I'm just going to move everything over to the right a little bit more. And I'm going to connect our true into our cast to our HUD and connect the output from our set current widget into the load game from slot. So that way in our main menu widget here, we can actually get rid of this because we don't need it anymore. All we're doing right now is loading our 3P game save. Then we're going ahead and we're getting a persistent level, and then we're opening the level, and we're getting this persistent level from our game instance here. And what we can do instead is I'm just going to go ahead and in our game instance, whoops, there we go. After we end up performing all of these actions and setting all the files, we can just go ahead and open level here. And we already have access to the persistent level, so we can go ahead and drop that in place right there. So I'm going to go ahead and compile and save this. Back in our main menu widget, I'm going to get rid of this get persistent level and open level. And all we're going to have here is loading the 3P game when we click the continue button. So all we're essentially going to be doing is when we click the continue button, we're going to run this load 3P game function. Then in our 3P game function, what we're going to be doing is, first of all, we're going to go ahead and check for a save game. If it's true, we're going to cast to our HUD. We're going to set the current widget to our loading screen. We're going to go ahead and load a game from our slot. We're going to cast to our save and set it as a variable. We're then going to get the same game instance variables from our save game. So we're going to draw out our persistent level and set that. And we're also going to set the current difficulty from the save. At that point, we're going to go ahead and set the game is loading to true. And then we're going to go ahead and open up the level listed in the persistent level. So if we compile and save everything, and we go in to hit play, and we hit continue game, we should get the same effect. So it loads us up in the proper spot with no issues. Likewise, what we can do is now in our characters, we can go into our player character. And in here where we get the current level name and then reopen the level, what we can simply do is get our game instance. And I don't know if we actually have a variable in here for a game instance. I don't believe we do. So we're going to have to go ahead and cast this. So we'll get our game instance. We'll go ahead and cast to our 3P game instance. And then as our 3P game instance, we're going to go ahead and search for the load 3P game. So this, when the character dies, it will automatically load the last save. So if we compile and save this, we can go ahead and hit play. And I'm going to go ahead and continue the game. And I should have some enemies that I left out here. So I'm just going to go ahead and let them kill me. And our game goes ahead and it loads successfully. So if I make my way out here again, those two enemies should still be left alive, which they are. And so that works fine. Also, as I noted in the previous video, I'm getting that issue with the compile error for the clear timer by handle. And for some reason, these leaks are leading me outside of the blueprint that's in question. But once again, we can fix this by deleting the clear timer by handle and searching for the clear and invalidate timer by handle. So if I go ahead and push that into place and compile and save, we are free of warnings. So I'm going to go ahead and close our player character right now. And then I want to take a look into what is happening in our loading of the game from our game state. First, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go into the level that we're using. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open up my level 1. And I'm going to open up the persistent map. And one thing I want to make clear about opening up this persistent map here is when you open up this persistent map, you still have access to all of the streaming levels from the Levels tab. But when you go up to Blueprints and Edit Blueprints or Open Level Blueprint here, you are opening the level blueprint for the persistent level. So even if I come over here and I double click on our level 1 S1 and I go to Blueprints and Open Level Blueprints, you take a look at the top here, it's the level blueprint for level 1_P, which is my persistent level. In order to get to any of these sub-levels here and their blueprints, you do have to go to the sub-levels here and select the blueprint for one of the sub-levels. So as long as this persistent map is open or opened initially, this open blueprints will only take you to the persistent level blueprint. Now, I want to take a look at what's going on here when we open our level. So initially, we're going ahead and we're loading the stream level. We're getting the game instance, casting, and setting a variable, getting the difficulty from the game instance, and then loading the stream level of enemies based on the difficulty. Then we're getting the game state, casting, setting a variable, and then we're going ahead and we're getting the game instance, and we're seeing if we're loading. If we are loading, we're doing this where we get the player save location, we set the player start location, we load locked doors, we load enemies, and then we continue onward. If not, then we just get the player start and set the player start location. Then we go ahead and we teleport and set the control rotation of our player character. And we go ahead and get our HUD and set the current widget to our gameplay widget. So at this point, why are we doing all of this in the level 1? We're going to be doing this no matter what when the game actually loads up. That and loading the game state is going to occur after the game's instance. And it's also going to occur after loading the level because the level dictates what game state we actually use. So what I'm going to do is I want to take all of this and put it into our game state when we actually load up our function in the game state. So we're going to go ahead and under game files, I'm going to go ahead and open up our game state. And I'm going to close out these functions for right now, so that we just are left with the construction script. And we have these functions over here. So we're setting the player save location, getting it, getting and setting the game state variables. We're updating locked doors, loading the locked doors, adding dead enemies, and loading dead enemies. And in our level blueprint, we're calling on the game state to do all these things in here. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to do all of this inside of our game state. So all we have to do is call on our game state and call on a function to do all of this for us. So inside of our game state here, I'm going to create a new function, and I'm going to call this start level. And this is what we're going to use to actually load up everything and start the level initially. So in our level blueprint here, all of this right here, we're actually just going to do inside of our game state. So real fast, I'm going to go ahead and from the sequence on, I'm going to go ahead and copy this and paste it into our start level here. Now, some of the variables aren't going to recognize because obviously we're getting a game state right here and we're inside the game state. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this game state variable and the links to it. And then here we have a unknown get actor transform. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create a new input, and I'm going to call this input the start point. And I'm going to make this an actor reference. So we're going to get rid of this right here because this is the reference that we use to get the actor transform of the player start. We're going to delete that, and I'm going to connect our start point up into this get actor transform pin. Now the other problem is we have this player start location variable that we used in our level. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to delete these. And we're going to substitute the player save location. And then once again, we'll get the player save location and we'll set it here. And we'll plug this in to our false. And then down here, when we actually perform the teleport, I'm going to delete this player start location and just plug in our player save location. And we can connect up the initial point to this sequence. So what we're going to do here for our start level is we're going to go ahead and we're going to call on the game instance. And from our event graph here, when the game state is started, it goes ahead and sets a variable for our game instance. So we're already going to have that accessible to us. So what we're going to do in this function is we're going to get our game instance and we're going to find out is the game loading. If the game is loading, we're going to go ahead and call on the function from our game state over here to get the player save location. We're going to go ahead and we don't really need to actually set this because at this point it should be loaded. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this get player save location and set player save location. Now we haven't set our game instance variables as of yet, but we do have a function to get the game state variables, and we can transition those over to our actual game state. So when we start the level, we're going to go ahead and we're going to find out is the game loading, and we're going to perform a branch, and then we have this load locked doors and load dead enemies, but we have to make sure that we grab everything from our save file. So we're going to want to grab the game instance, and we're going to call on the function to get the game state variables, because this function right here, if we open it up, ends up calling on our save game file and getting the save game state variables and goes ahead and returns them to us. So right here we get these return nodes where we can go ahead and then we can call on our set game state variables function and then just plug in the pins. Now, once we have this all loaded up, we can call on our load locked doors and load dead enemies. That way it will go ahead and update all the locked doors and then destroy any enemies that have been killed. Now, if it's false, we just get the actor transform from our input for the start level and set our player save location. We then go ahead and teleport our player to the player save location and then set the control rotation, finally setting the widget to our gameplay widget. So we have to call on this in our level blueprint here. So right here from when we get the game sequence, I'm going to go ahead and delete this. And we actually don't need a reference to our game state at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. And we can delete the variable itself as well as this player start location, since we're not using that in this script over here to the right anymore. And then what we can do as our 3P game state, we can go ahead and call on the start level. And we're going to have to give it a reference to the start point. So we're going to need to go out into the level, find our start point, select it, and in our level blueprint, right click and create a reference to the player start and plug this in. So I'm going to go ahead and compile this, and I'm going to compile and save our game state blueprint as well. And if we go ahead and hit play, this is going to take us into our level, but we can still access our main menu. So I'll use the pause menu to go to our main menu. And I'm going to go ahead and hit continue game. And it goes ahead and it loads us up to the correct location. And we should still have 2 enemies in here. And then over to the left here, there was 1 enemy in this area who is still dead. So it correctly updated our dead enemies list, and it loaded up the correct difficulty as well. So to follow through everything that we're doing so far, what's going to happen is that when the main menu begins to load here, we're going to check to see if there's a save game. If we have a save game, we're going to go ahead and enable our continue button. Now, once we've clicked the continue button, we're going to call on our game instance to load the 3P game. So if we open that up, when we load the 3P game, now we're going to begin by checking for a save game, because we always want to check for a save game anytime we try to load anything. So we'll check for the save game, and if it's true, we're going to go ahead, grab our player controller, we're going to get the HUD, we're going to cast to our player HUD, and we're going to set our current widget to our loading screen widget. From there, we're going to load a game from slot, so we have the name of our slot. We're going to cast to that save, and we're going to set it into a variable. From there, we're going to go ahead and get our save game instance variables. We're going to go ahead and set the persistent level and the current difficulty. And then we're going to go ahead and set the variable as game loading. And I want to keep this in mind for right now, because when we get to the appropriate point, we're going to have to go ahead and actually unset this. Now, once we set the game as loading, we go ahead and open up the persistent level from our save. So when the level goes ahead and opens up, we're going to go over to our level 1 persistent level map. We're loading in the stream level. We're going ahead and getting our game instance and casting it. We're going ahead and setting a variable in our level for the game instance, which, to be honest at this point, we don't actually need. And we can actually get rid of this set game instance variable and delete the variable from our variables list. So we can just directly call on the cast to get the difficulty. And I'll go ahead and drag this over a little bit more. So we get the difficulty from our game instance. We provide a switch. So based on the difficulty, we load up the appropriate streaming level with the enemies. From there, we go ahead and we get our game state. We cast to our game state, and we call on this start level. So I'm going to hit compile real fast. And then we perform our start level. So if we open up our start level, we're going to go ahead and we take in a start point. So in our level blueprint here, we can plug in the player start so that if we're not actually loading a game, we can go ahead and have a reference to that player start to teleport the player to. So from our start level in our game state here, we perform our sequence. where we go ahead and we get our game instance and we get the game is loading. And this game instance variable comes from the event graph. When we begin play, we go ahead and get our game instance and set it. And one thing you'll notice here is, I forgot about this, we have a check to see if the game is loading. And so if it's true, we get our game state variables and we set them. We can actually replace this with our set game state variables function, because it contains the exact same thing. And then we just go ahead and plug our pins in correctly. And then if it's false, we go ahead and we set the persistent level within our game instance. So if we take a look at our start level function here, this is actually unnecessary. We can get rid of getting the save game variables and setting them. And we can go ahead and just drag this over here. So all we're simply doing is, if the game is loading, we're loading the locked doors and we're loading the dead enemies, because the get from the save is being performed when the game state starts. And then if we are not loading the game, we just get the transform from our start point as our input and set the player save location. And then finally, once we have our sequence, we go into our then one pin, where we go ahead and teleport our player to the player save location. We set the control rotation to the rotation within the transform. And then we go ahead and set the widget to our gameplay widget. So I'm going to go ahead and compile and save this. And I'm going to go back to our main window and I'm going to hit Save All. So if we go to our main menu, I'm going to go ahead and open that up. And we're going to go ahead and hit play. So I'm going to start off with a new game and we'll set it to normal. And I'm going to make my way. I'm going to kill this one enemy here. And it looks like there's something in here that's blocking my fire, which I'll have to get to. So I'm going to just carry on for now and keep that in mind for later. And we have these two guys. I'm going to go ahead and kill the shotgun enemy. And I believe it's a checkpoint that's causing that issue. So I'm going to get to the save game checkpoint here. And, alright, we're going to have to take care of something. So when our save point exists, it's actually blocking the weapon fire. So that is an issue we're going to have to address. But we've hit our save checkpoint right now, and I'm going to hit P to go into our pause menu. I'm going to go back to our main menu. And let's go ahead and continue the game and see if it loads up everything that we had from before. So it loads us up in the correct place. And as we travel back, we're going to see that there's only one enemy left here. So it updated our enemy actors correctly. And this enemy over here is dead as well. Now, we're going to run into one more issue, that if we go into our pause menu and go back to the main menu, and if I hit New Game, I'm going to set it to normal, it's going to load us up at our save point. And the reason it's doing this is because we're not actually setting the game as loading to false at any point. So, from our game state here, once we get done casting to our HUD and setting the widget within our start level function, we're going to go ahead and we're going to get our game instance. And we're going to call on the set is loading. So we're going to set is game loading. And we're going to set this to false. So if we go ahead and compile and save and hit play, I'm going to go ahead and load up a game which will trigger the game to set is loading to true. And if we go back to our main menu and we hit on a new game and normal, it's going to go ahead and actually start us at the level start point. So that's one issue down. The other issue that I would like to take care of is when we go ahead and click on new game here, when we have an existing save, it just automatically takes us into here and we're going to overwrite our save, and it's not going to give us any warning. So I want to go ahead and make a screen that pops up that checks to see if we have a save game in existence that we want to confirm whether the user wants to delete that save or overwrite that save. So if I go into our main menu widget here and we click on the new game button, we're just basically prompting the difficulty select by bringing up the difficulty select widget. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to put some comment boxes around here. So this is going to be the exit button. And then we're going to click on the settings button and put a comment box around there. And then we have our continue button right here. So I'm going to put a comment box around that and we'll call it the continue button. Now for our new game button here, we're going to need to know whether or not a save game exists. So right after our check for save game here, I'm going to drag off our set is enabled here. I'm going to move it to the side. And from our save game exists, I'm going to go ahead and promote this to a variable. And we'll just call it save game exists. Pretty straightforward, right? So we're going to plug this in. And we can go ahead and just neaten this up by plugging our save game exists into the set is enabled. So now all we're doing is setting a variable as to whether a save game exists and then enabling the button. So if we come down to our new game here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab our functionality here to the side and we're going to put in a branch. And we're going to go ahead and connect that up and we're going to check to see if this save game does in fact exist. Now, if it doesn't exist, we're going to do what we did before. So I'm just going to plug our false from the branch into our create difficulty select widget. And we're going to have to create a new widget to handle what we want to happen if a save game already exists. So back at our main window, I'm going to go into our HUD folder and I'm going to create a new user interface widget blueprint. And I'm going to call this widget overwrite save widget. And we're going to go ahead and open this up. And I'm going to make this pretty simple. So I'm going to start by replacing the canvas panel with an overlay. We're going to go ahead and search for an image. And I'm going to go ahead and drag this onto the overlay and I'm going to expand it to fill out everything. And I'm going to set the color and opacity to black and the alpha to 0.5. And I'm going to hit OK. Next, I'm going to go ahead and insert a vertical box. And I'm going to go ahead and center this in the screen. And then I'm going to want to add some text to it. So we'll go ahead and search for text. And we'll drag it and drop it onto our vertical box. And I'm actually going to use 2 text lines. So the first text line here, we're going to say save game already exists. And then for the second block, we're going to ask, do you want to overwrite save game? And then, of course, we can always set the font and the size. And then also, I'm going to want to go ahead and put in a horizontal box. And I'm going to drag and drop this onto our vertical box so it's right below our text. And we're going to need to add in a pair of buttons. And then each button is going to need some text on it. So I'll search for some text and I'll drop some text onto each button. So for Each button, I'm going to set them to go ahead and fill. So we can go ahead and set the appearance up for us. So for normal, we can set a color. And then for the hovered and the pressed as well. And then we can do the same thing with our other button. And then for the text, we can set the text on this one to be yes, and the other one will be our no button. And once again, we can go ahead and set the font and the size if necessary. And then we can add some padding if we want. So I'm going to go ahead and just add 10 to the padding on each of these. And we can even add some padding to the buttons, which I'm not going to be a fan of. So I'm going to, I'm going to add that in. And then I kind of want to drape this in an image. So in the vertical box, I'm going to right click and wrap with. And a border. And then we can go ahead and set the brush color here so that we can make it a little bit darker. I'm going to hit OK. So I'm just going to go ahead and click on each button. And then for the yes button, I'm just going to simply call this the yes button. And then for the no button, I'm going to once again just call it the no button. And we're going to need to go ahead and get a reference in our graph to onClicked events. So I'm going to select the yes button and add an onClicked event. And then do the same thing for our no button. Get a onClicked event. And for the no button, we're just simply going to remove from parent. This is going to be effectively a cancel button. So if we compile and save this, if we end up hitting the no button, it's going to take us back to the main menu because we're just going to take this widget and we're going to add it to our overlay. So it's going to layer it on top of our main menu. And if we click no, it's going to go ahead and destroy this widget and then bring our main menu back. Now for the yes button, we're going to go ahead and we're going to do the same exact thing that we do if we start a new game and there's no save game. So I'm just going to simply copy this and I'm going to go ahead and paste it into our graph here. So we're getting the player controller, and then we're going to go ahead and create a difficulty select widget and add it to the viewport. And then what we're going to want to do as well is I'm going to copy this remove from parent because we want to remove the widget from the parent so it's not there anymore. So we're going to go ahead and destroy this save game already exists screen when we go ahead and click yes. And then bring up the difficulty select menu. If we hit no, all we're simply going to do is destroy this widget, and we're going to have the main menu behind that already. So finally, in our main menu widget, we're going to want to go ahead and to make things easy, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this create difficulty select widget, and I'm going to change this to our overwrite save widget. So essentially what we're doing now is from our main menu widget, if we click the new game button, we're going to perform a check to see if the save game exists. If the save game does exist, we're going to create the overwrite save widget and we're going to add it to the viewport. If it doesn't exist, we're going to go ahead and add our difficulty select widget to the viewport. So if we go ahead and compile and save and we go ahead and hit play, and we go ahead and hit our new game button, it's going to pop up with this save game already exists. Do you want to overwrite save game? If we hit no, it's going to bring us back to this main menu. And if we hit yes, it's going to prompt us to select our difficulty. And if we hit normal, we're going to go ahead and load up the game. So just go ahead and I'll put a comment box around this. And we'll call this the new game button. And we can just go ahead and drag everything into place right there. So I'm going to go ahead and compile and save this. So at this point, I'm just going to go ahead and overview everything that we're doing so far, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page as far as what's going on. So we're going to start in our main menu widget. So when we go ahead and construct our main menu widget, we're getting a reference to our game instance, checking for a save game, and setting a variable to tell us whether or not a save game exists. Then we're going to go ahead and enable our continue button based on whether the save game exists. So for our new game button, we're going to go ahead and check the save game exists. And if it's true, we're going to go ahead and create a widget that prompts us with whether or not we want to go ahead and overwrite our save. So it's going to create this widget and add it to our viewport. If it's false, we're just going to bring up the difficulty select. And then in our overwrite save widget, all we're doing is providing this prompt to the player. And if the player clicks no, we're removing that widget from the screen, bringing us back to the main menu. And if the player says yes, we're going to go ahead and provide a difficulty select widget, which is going to add it to a viewport and then remove our overwrite save widget from the viewport. And then we're going to go into our difficulty select widget, and it's going to provide a prompt for easy, normal, or hard, or canceling. And canceling is easy as we're just going to remove this widget, the difficulty select widget, from our screen. And then if we click easy, normal, or hard, we're going to set the difficulty within our game instance to the appropriate value. And then we're going to go ahead and get our player controller, get a HUD, cast to our player HUD, set the current widget to the loading screen. I put in a small delay there. And then we're going to go ahead and open our starting level. Now in our main menu widget, if we go ahead and load a game, so if our continue button is enabled, we're going to get our game instance and we're going to call on this load 3p game function. And one thing that's nice about the way that we set up our load 3p game function is that we can actually call this pretty much from anywhere. So if in the pause menu you wanted to put in a button that loads the last save, all you have to do is call on this load 3p game function, and it will actually do all the work for us. So when we go ahead and load the 3p game, we go ahead and I'm going to open that up. And what we're essentially doing is we're checking for a save game because we always want to check for a save game before we load something. And if a save game does exist, we're going to go ahead and we're going to get the player controller, get the HUD, cast it, and set our current widget to our loading screen. So we don't have to set it anywhere else. Next, we're going to go ahead and load our game from our slot, and we have our slot name saved into a variable. We're going to cast to our save game, and we're going to set the save game into a variable. And we're going to get the instance variables, which our game instance is holding on to, which are going to be our persistent level and our current difficulty, and we're setting those. And then we're going to go ahead and set is the game loading to true. We're then going to go ahead and call on open level, and we're going to open our persistent level. Now, in the level, if we open up our level 1p, and we actually open up our level blueprint, when the level loads up, when begin play is called, it's going to go ahead and it's going to load the streaming level that actually contains all of the level content. We're going to get our game instance and cast it. We're going to get the difficulty, and then we're going to go ahead and perform a switch and load the streaming level with the enemies that is pertinent to that difficulty. We're then going to get our game state, we're going to cast to it, and we're going to call on the start level function. and we're going to feed it a player start. So when we actually start the level, I'm going to open up that function. We take in our start point, and we enter our sequence where we go ahead and we get our game instance and find out, is game loading? If the game is loading, we go ahead and load the locked doors and we load the dead enemies. Now we get our game instance and we pull our variables when the event graph begins play. So when we begin play, we're going to grab our game instance, set our game instance, find out if it's loading, and if we are loading a game, we're going to go ahead and get the save game state variables from our game instance, and we're going to set them in our game state. If not, we're just simply going to get the current level name, and we're going to set the persistent level within our game instance. Now, the reason this works this way is because the game state is loaded by the level. If we go into the main window here, and we go to our world settings, there's going to be the section for game mode. And one of the options we have in here is our game state class. So the level is actually responsible for loading up the game state. So anytime we switch a level, a new game state is produced. And if you want to create custom events within a level, or you want to create custom rules for a level, you could create a child class of our game state and go ahead and set up some extra things going on within that game state. So meanwhile, back in our game state, when we start the level, we go ahead and we're continuing on where we were. So we're finding out if the game is loading. We're loading the locked doors and loading the dead enemies. But if we're not loading the level, we're just getting the transform for the start point that we feed in. And we're setting the player save location. From there, we're going to head and get the player save location, break the transform, and we're going to teleport our character to the player save location. Then we're going to go ahead and set the control rotation so our character is facing the right direction. And then finally, we're going to go ahead and get our HUD, and we're going to go ahead and cast to our player HUD, set us to the gameplay widget, and then we're going to go ahead and unset is game loading. So that's going to complete today's video. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and leave them down below, and thanks for watching.